Florida woman found dead. Her father is the suspect, the Lori Paige story. Before we dive in, kindly hit the subscribe button and let us know where you are watching from in the comment. The Florida sun was just starting to set. The air was thick, heavy, and quiet. Too quiet for a Saturday evening in Tallahassee. On the surface, it looked like a normal weekend. People were out on their porches. Cars hummed along the streets. And in a small home tucked away in a peaceful neighborhood, something horrifying had already happened. Inside that home was 29-year-old Lori Paige, a woman everyone described as warm, bright, someone who could light up a room just by walking in. She worked hard. She had friends who adored her, and she loved her family, especially her father, Robert Paige. They weren't perfect, but they were close, or at least that's what everyone thought. But by Sunday morning, that bond would be shattered forever. Saturday, 9:45 p.m., a neighbor noticed something strange. Lori's car was still parked in the driveway. Lights were on inside, but there was no sound, no movement. She had music playing earlier. The neighbor remembered hearing laughter around 6 p.m. Now silence. He shrugged it off at first. Maybe she'd gone to bed early, but something felt wrong. That feeling didn't go away. By Sunday morning, it was still there, stronger. Sunday, 8:10 a.m. Lori didn't show up for her church service. She never missed. Friends started texting, calling. No response. By 9 a.m., the calls went straight to voicemail. That's when concern turned into panic. 9:45 a.m., a welfare check. A friend called the Tallahassee Police Department. "I'm worried about my friend Lori. She's not answering. Her car's here. Please check on her." Officers arrived at the house. They knocked. No answer. They circled the property. Something caught their eye. The back door was slightly open. "Lori!" Their voices echoed into silence. When they stepped inside, they immediately felt the weight of the air. Something was off. Stillness. A chill that didn't belong. Then, in the hallway near the bedroom, they found her. The scene was grim. Lori Paige was dead. The moment the officer called it in, everything changed. The quiet street filled with flashing blue and red lights. Neighbors came out in shock. And word spread fast. "There's been a death in the Paige house." Detectives quickly secured the scene. They noticed no signs of forced entry. Nothing appeared stolen. Her purse, phone, and keys were all there. This wasn't a burglary gone wrong. This was personal. And the brutality of it, that's what made it even harder to comprehend. It wasn't random. Whoever did this knew her. As investigators began piecing things together, they started with the people closest to Lori. Friends, co-workers, family, and at the top of that list, her father, Robert Paige. He was known around town. A quiet man in his 60s. Polite, friendly, a man who loved his daughter deeply, or so everyone thought. When detectives first reached out, Robert didn't seem surprised. But his reaction, it was strange. He didn't cry. He didn't ask how she died. He just sighed and said, "I knew something bad was going to happen." Those words stuck with investigators. What did he mean by that? Detective Monroe, leading the case, began with routine questioning. "Mr. Paige, when was the last time you saw your daughter?" He paused. "Friday night," he said. "We had dinner." She seemed upset, but she wouldn't tell me why. Upset? Why? Detective Monroe wrote that down immediately. "What did you talk about?" Robert hesitated. "She wanted to move," he finally said. "She was thinking about leaving Tallahassee. I told her that was a bad idea. Why would that matter?" Detective Monroe pressed further, but Robert quickly changed the subject. "I just can't believe this," he muttered. "She was my baby girl." His tone was flat, controlled, too controlled. Something didn't sit right. Later that day, the coroner confirmed what detectives feared. Lori's death wasn't an accident. She had been strangled. It was violent, intentional, and done up close, face to face. That changed everything. Who could look her in the eyes and do something like that? Sunday night, the search for clues. Detectives scoured Lori's home. They found no signs of a struggle in the living room. No broken glass. No blood in the kitchen. But in her bedroom, they found something chilling. A chair knocked over, pillow on the floor, and on that pillow, faint smudges. They sent it to the lab. Within hours, results came back. Fingerprints. But whose? Investigators ran the prints through the system. The results made their hearts sink. They belonged to her father. Now, it wasn't uncommon for a parent's prints to be in their child's home. But these weren't on a doorknob, or a cup, or the fridge. They were on the pillow used to smother her. The evidence started to build quietly, piece by piece. Phone records. A witness who saw Robert's truck parked near Lori's home late Saturday night. And surveillance footage from a nearby gas station that caught a vehicle matching his description heading toward her neighborhood. Just hours before she was found dead. It was all adding up. Still, police had to be sure. No mistakes. No assumptions. Because this wasn't just another case. It was a father accused of killing his daughter. The next morning, detectives visited Robert again. They told him the results. The prints. The video. He didn't flinch. Instead, he looked at the ground and whispered, "She shouldn't have talked back to me." That sentence froze the entire room. Detective Monroe leaned forward. "What do you mean by that?" Robert didn't answer. He just stared out the window. Seconds turned into silence. And then tears. "I didn't mean to," he muttered. "I just wanted her to listen." The confession came slowly, painfully, almost in disbelief of his own words. He admitted they'd argued that night. She wanted to move away, start over. He felt abandoned. He said he lost control. One argument, one moment of rage, and everything was gone. Detectives were silent. Even after years in homicide, it never got easier. How does a man, a father, cross that line? They read him his rights. He didn't resist. He didn't fight. He just said, "Tell her I'm sorry," as if she were still there to hear it. By Monday morning, the story hit every news outlet in Florida. Tallahassee father arrested in daughter's death. The town was in shock. People couldn't believe it. The man they'd seen mowing his lawn every Sunday, the man who smiled at everyone in the grocery store, had done the unthinkable. As reporters swarmed the courthouse, Lori's friends gathered at a candlelight vigil. There were photos of her smiling, holding her dog, laughing with friends. They cried, whispered prayers, and asked the same question everyone was asking. Why? But deep in the investigation files, detectives still had unanswered questions. Because some parts of Robert's story didn't add up. He said he went home right after the argument. But the gas station footage showed him returning to her neighborhood an hour later. Why? What did he do in that time? And why were there still text messages sent from Lori's phone after she was already dead? Those messages didn't sound like her. They were short, cold, robotic. Could Robert have sent them, trying to cover his tracks? Or was someone else involved? Detective Monroe started to wonder. Maybe this wasn't as simple as a father's rage. Maybe something else had pushed him to the edge. Something darker. But what? That's where the story takes a turn. Because behind Lori Paige's tragic death was a secret her father had been hiding for years. The sun hadn't even risen when detectives went back to the Tallahassee Police Department. The night had been long, exhausting, but nobody could sleep. Not after what Robert Paige had confessed. He said he killed his daughter. He said it was an accident. He said he just wanted her to listen. But the more Detective Monroe thought about it, the less it made sense. Why would a man who claimed to love his daughter so deeply strangle her with his own hands? And if it was truly an accident, why did he lie about what time he left her house? Why send text messages from her phone hours after she was already gone? Something was missing. Something big. Monday, 6:35 a.m. The interrogation room was cold. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead. And across from Detective Monroe sat Robert Paige. He looked hollow, broken. His hands trembled slightly as he stared at the table. Monroe studied him for a moment before speaking. "Robert," he said softly, "we need to talk about the truth." Robert didn't answer. "You told us you lost your temper, that this was an accident." Monroe leaned forward. But your story doesn't match the evidence. Robert's jaw tightened. Monroe slid a photo across the table, a still from the gas station footage. It showed Robert's truck, time-stamped 11:42 p.m., driving toward Lori's neighborhood. You told us you left her house at 9:30, Monroe said quietly. So why were you back in her neighborhood 2 hours later? Silence. Robert's breathing quickened. He looked at the photo, then back at Monroe. His lips trembled. I can explain, he whispered. Then explain, Monroe said. Robert's voice was faint. I went back because I remembered something she said. What did she say? She told me she was going to tell people about me. Monroe frowned. Tell them what? Robert's eyes flicked upward. Wet, angry, terrified. She said she was going to ruin me. Monroe's heart thudded. Ruin you? How? Robert didn't answer. He stared down, shaking his head. Monroe waited. Then he quietly pushed another photo forward, one of Lori, smiling. She's gone now, Robert, Monroe said softly. But if there's something you're hiding, now's the time to say it. Robert's voice cracked. I didn't want it to come out, he said. I couldn't let it. The room froze. What couldn't you let out? Monroe pressed. Robert's silence stretched on. Every second that passed felt heavier than the last. Finally, he whispered, You'll find out anyway. Monroe leaned back. That was all he needed to hear. Detectives obtained a search warrant for Robert Paige's house. It was a modest, single-story home just 15 minutes from Lori's. Neat yard. Wind chimes on the porch. A place that looked ordinary, peaceful. But inside, investigators found something that changed the entire course of the case. In the living room, inside a locked drawer, was a stack of letters. Dozens of them, each one written in Lori's handwriting. They weren't addressed to anyone. They were unsent. But the words inside were haunting. One letter read, I can't keep this secret forever. You hurt me, and I can't pretend it didn't happen. I'm tired of being scared of you. Another said, You act like you love me, but love doesn't feel like this. I want to be free of you. I want to tell someone. Detectives exchanged looks. The letters dated back months. Some were crumpled, as if she'd written them and changed her mind about mailing them. But all of them told the same story, a daughter living in fear of her father. When Monroe saw those letters, he knew. This wasn't just an argument gone wrong. This was years of control, manipulation, and fear that had finally exploded. He called the district attorney immediately. Get ready, he said. This case just got darker. By Tuesday morning, the Lori Paige case was all over Florida headlines. Father arrested in daughter's death. Motive still unclear. Family secrets emerge in tragic Tallahassee murder. Reporters camped outside both homes. Neighbors whispered to cameras, saying they never saw any signs of trouble. He was always so kind, one said. She adored him, another added. But now the truth was starting to leak out. And when people learned about the letters, the town's sympathy turned to outrage. Back at the precinct, Detective Monroe confronted Robert again. He placed the letters on the table. Robert stared at them, expressionless. She wrote these, Monroe said, months ago. You scared her, didn't you? Robert didn't answer. She was planning to tell someone, Monroe continued. Maybe that's what the argument was really about. That's when Robert's composure cracked. She was going to destroy everything I built, he said through clenched teeth. Everything. What did she know, Robert? Monroe asked. Robert slammed his fist on the table. I said too much already. While Monroe continued his questioning, the behavioral analysis team started digging into Robert's past. They found something disturbing. Over a decade earlier, Robert had been investigated in a neighboring county for inappropriate behavior involving a teenage relative, but no charges were filed. The family kept it quiet. The case disappeared. Now it seemed that secret was coming back to light through Lori. The working theory was that Lori had finally confronted him about it. Maybe she threatened to go to the police. Maybe she told him she couldn't live with the guilt anymore. And that confrontation triggered his rage. detectives obtained Lori's phone records and found something even more chilling. The night she died, she texted a friend, "If anything happens to me, look at my dad." The timestamp was 9:27 p.m., just minutes before Robert claimed to have left her house. That message hit everyone in the room like a gut punch. She knew, she felt it, and she was right. At this point, there was no going back. Detectives charged Robert Paige with first-degree murder. But the case was far from over, because now they needed to prove what really happened that night. Every minute, every movement, every lie. Investigators created a detailed timeline. It started at 6 p.m., when Lori's neighbor saw her return home from work. Around 7 p.m., Robert arrived at her house. He brought takeout from her favorite restaurant. She thought it was a nice gesture, but it wasn't. By 8:15 p.m., the argument started. Neighbors heard raised voices, faint but tense. At 9:20, Lori texted her friend. At 9:45, her phone went silent. Then, at 11:42, Robert's truck appeared on the gas station camera, heading back toward her home. And by midnight, Lori was gone. The evidence was airtight. But for Detective Monroe, the hardest part wasn't proving guilt. It was understanding the motive. What kind of darkness grows inside a father until he sees his daughter as a threat? He thought about it every night. He'd seen men kill over money, drugs, jealousy. But this was different. This was something far more twisted. Wednesday, the court hearing. When Robert was brought into the courtroom, reporters swarmed the hallway. The cameras flashed. He looked fragile, almost ghost-like. The prosecutor read the charges. First-degree murder. Lori's friends filled the benches behind him, wearing shirts with her picture. Some cried quietly. Others stared at Robert with hatred. And in the middle of it all, Detective Monroe sat silently, watching. When the judge asked if Robert understood the charges, he nodded once and said, "Yes, Your Honor." No emotion, no apology, just emptiness. For more chilling true crime stories, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Tallahassee had gone quiet. Too quiet. By now, every news outlet in Florida had picked up the story. A father charged with killing his own daughter. A secret no one saw coming. But inside the Tallahassee Police Department, Detective Monroe wasn't celebrating. Because something about the timeline still didn't add up. According to the gas station footage, Robert Paige was seen driving toward Lori's house at 11:42 p.m., but investigators couldn't find any footage of him leaving the area afterward. No return trip, no traffic cam hits, nothing. It was as if he'd vanished for hours before finally driving home just before sunrise. So the question was simple: where had he gone? Thursday, 7:15 a.m., Detective Monroe sat at his desk, staring at the evidence board. Photos of Lori, her house, the letters, the truck, and a red line connecting them all, pointing to one man, Robert Paige. But then, on the corner of the board, there was a new photo. A woman, late 50s, sharp eyes, cold smile. Her name was Linda Paige, Robert's estranged wife, Lori's mother. They'd divorced over a decade ago, barely spoke, lived in separate towns. But when detectives checked Robert's phone records, they found a strange detail. He called Linda 3 times the night Lori died. Each call lasted less than 2 minutes. And when officers asked her about it, she said something that froze Monroe in place. "Yes," he called. "He told me Lori was gone. But he said it was too late to help her." Monroe leaned forward. "Too late, how?" She hesitated, then said, "He told me not to say anything, that he'd handle it." Handle it. Those words echoed in Monroe's head. It sounded like a cover-up. And the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. Because whoever helped Robert clean up knew details only a second person could know. Someone had moved the body. Someone had helped dispose of evidence. Someone who cared enough or was scared enough to protect him. And that someone might have been Lori's mother. Detectives got a warrant for Linda's phone and car. Inside the glove compartment of her silver Honda, they found a pair of latex gloves and a small plastic hair clip. Pink, broken. It looked ordinary, until Monroe showed it to Lori's best friend, Megan. Her reaction said it all. "That's Lori's," she whispered. "She wore it all the time. I even saw her wearing it in her last Instagram story." Monroe felt his stomach twist. It wasn't proof of murder yet, but it was proof that Linda had been near Lori's body after her death. And now she had questions to answer. The room was cold again. Linda sat across from Monroe, calm, almost detached. She didn't look like a grieving mother. She looked like someone rehearsing. Monroe began gently. "When was the last time you saw your daughter?" "Months ago," she said. "We weren't close." "Did you talk to her on the night of her death?" "No. Your phone records say otherwise." Silence. Monroe slid a paper across the table, the call log. 3 calls from Robert, the same night she died. Then your car leaving your home at 2:30 a.m. Linda's expression hardened. "I went for a drive," she said flatly. "Where to? Does it matter?" "It does," Monroe replied, "because we found something in your car. Something that belonged to your daughter." Her eyes flickered, a tiny, involuntary twitch. Monroe leaned forward. "Linda, we know you went to Lori's house that night. We know you helped him. The only question is, why?" She stared at him for a long moment. Then her voice cracked. "I didn't kill her," she said quietly. "I just wanted to protect him." "Protect who?" Monroe asked. "My husband," she whispered. "He called me, and he sounded terrified." "Terrified of what?" Linda swallowed hard. "He said he didn't mean to hurt her, that it just happened, that she was going to tell everyone his secret." "What secret?" Monroe pressed. Linda hesitated. And then, through tears, she said the words Monroe had been dreading. "He hurt her when she was a child." The room went silent. Monroe's throat tightened. He'd suspected it, but hearing it aloud still hit like a knife to the chest. Linda continued, her voice trembling. "He made me promise never to tell. He said he'd go to jail." But Lori remembered. She told him she was done protecting him, that she was going to the police. Monroe clenched his jaw. "So he killed her to keep her quiet." Linda nodded weakly. "And you helped him move the body," Monroe said. Tears slid down her face. "He begged me, said he didn't know what to do. I thought if I helped him, maybe it would make it go away." Monroe's tone hardened. "You drove to the house after midnight?" She nodded. "He had already done it." She was on the floor, couldn't look. He wrapped her in a blanket. "I helped him carry her to the truck." Her voice broke. "He said he'd take care of it, that no one would ever find her." Monroe felt sick. He'd seen dark cases before, but this, a mother helping hide her daughter's body, was almost too much to process. Still, her confession filled in the missing pieces. Robert killed Lori around 9:45 p.m., called Linda around 11 o'clock. She drove down to help him move the body in the middle of the night. It explained everything. The missing hours, the hair clip, the silence. But one question still burned in Monroe's mind. "Where did you take her?" he asked. Linda hesitated, then whispered, "The woods, off County Road 14. At dawn, a convoy of police cars rolled down a narrow dirt road, leading into a stretch of pine forest just outside Tallahassee. The air was heavy with humidity, the ground soft from last night's rain. Linda led the way, hands shaking, pointing ahead. "There," she said, "by the old hunting trail." When investigators reached the spot, they stopped cold. A patch of freshly disturbed earth. A faint smell in the air that made their stomachs turn. It didn't take long. Within an hour, they unearthed a tarp, wrapped tightly, buried beneath a layer of leaves. Inside was Lori Paige, still wearing the same shirt she'd worn in her last photo. The same hair clip, or what was left of it, tangled in her hair. Everyone went silent. Even the birds seemed to stop. Detective Monroe turned away for a moment, his chest tight. He'd seen a lot in his career, but nothing prepared him for this. When the coroner confirmed the body was Lori's, the case shifted from missing person to capital murder. And now both Robert and Linda Paige were charged. Robert for the murder, Linda for being an accessory and tampering with evidence. The courtroom was packed. The world was watching. Within hours, national outlets picked up the story. Parents accused of killing and burying their own daughter. Florida family horror, the Paige case. A secret buried for years comes to light. Social media exploded. People demanded justice. Lori's friends created a memorial page. Thousands of comments poured in from around the country. She tried to speak up, and they silenced her. How could her own parents do this? This case broke my heart. The story became a symbol of family secrets, of abuse, of the cost of silence. Detective Monroe spent weeks preparing the evidence for court. Every text, every call, every letter, every second of Lori's recording. But what haunted him most wasn't the crime itself. It was how preventable it was. Lori had reached out for help. She told her friends she was scared. She'd even left a digital trail, messages, notes, recordings. She did everything victims are told to do. And still, she ended up in the ground. That reality broke Monroe more than he cared to admit. The sun was barely up over Tallahassee when detectives gathered in a small, gray interrogation room. The walls were blank. A single camera blinked red in the corner. They were waiting for the man who had shocked an entire city. David Paige, Lori's father. He walked in quietly, wrists cuffed, head down. He looked nothing like the monster people imagined. He looked tired. Detective Grant watched him take a seat. The silence stretched. The only sound was the hum of the ceiling vent. Then Grant broke it. "David, we just need to understand what happened." David didn't look up. He just nodded, his voice flat. "I already told you. I didn't mean for it to go that far." Those words, they froze everyone in the room. It wasn't a denial. It wasn't an excuse. It was something in between. Detective Grant leaned forward. He'd done this for 20 years. He knew when a man's guilt was eating him alive. "Tell me about that night," Grant said softly. David took a deep breath. His eyes filled with something that looked like regret, and something else. Rage, maybe. Fear. "We argued," he said. "She said things I couldn't take back. Things about her mother. About me." Grant waited. The camera kept rolling. "She told me I'd failed her. That she hated me. That she wished I was dead." He stopped, voice cracking. I just snapped. He looked down at his hands, still cuffed. They trembled. "I didn't go there to hurt her. I just wanted to talk. But she wouldn't listen." Grant said nothing. He knew silence made people speak more. David continued. "She shoved me. I shoved her back. She fell. I panicked. But the forensics didn't match a fall. Lori had been strangled. Her injuries showed deliberate force. This wasn't a single push, it was rage unleashed." As David spoke, the detectives in the observation room exchanged glances. They'd seen enough cases to know when someone was only telling half the truth. David's story didn't line up with the evidence. The bruises on Lori's neck, the broken picture frame with his fingerprints, the neighbors who heard shouting. It wasn't an accident. It was murder. Still, Grant stayed calm. He needed David to keep talking. "You said she fell. Then what happened?" David's voice dropped to a whisper. "I tried to wake her up. I called her name. But she didn't move." He paused, breathing heavily. "I didn't know what to do. I just sat there. Then I left." "You left your daughter?" Grant asked. David looked up for the first time. Tears streamed down his face. "She wasn't supposed to die." Detectives let him sit in silence for a moment. Then Grant slid a photo across the table. It was Lori smiling in her graduation cap. "This was your daughter. She loved you. She trusted you." David broke down. He sobbed uncontrollably. The confession came in fragments. He said he'd been drinking. He said he'd felt disrespected. He said he just lost control. Every word cut deeper. It wasn't premeditated, at least not in his version of events. But prosecutors would later argue differently. He'd driven from his home with anger already burning. He'd taken his old revolver just in case. And Lori had texted a friend hours before. "My dad's acting weird. I'm scared he might show up." Those words became the most chilling evidence in the case. As David confessed, officers were already executing search warrants at his home. They found the revolver. It hadn't been fired, but they also found a notebook. Inside, written in shaky handwriting, were lines that made detectives stop cold. "She doesn't listen anymore. She chose everyone over me. If I can't make her understand, no one will." It wasn't just an angry father's outburst. It was obsession, possession. Lori's death wasn't a split-second accident. It was the boiling point of years of resentment. That night, Lori's mother, Janet, sat with a reporter from a local TV station. Her eyes were red, her voice trembling. "He always had a temper," she said, "but I never thought he'd hurt her. Never." She looked straight into the camera. Lori wanted peace. She wanted to move on, but he couldn't let go. Her words echoed across social media. #JusticeForLori began trending in Florida. People were furious. How could a father, her own flesh and blood, take her life? Tallahassee turned into a community of grief. Candlelight vigils filled the park near Lori's apartment. Friends placed flowers, photos, and handwritten notes under a tree where she used to walk her dog. One note read, "You deserved to live your dreams, not die for his anger." The city demanded answers, and they wanted accountability. For weeks, the media painted David Paige as a monster, but his defense team would soon paint a very different picture. A broken man pushed past his limits. As the trial date approached, both sides prepared for a brutal courtroom war. Prosecutors had the confession, the texts, the physical evidence. But the defense had something powerful too: emotion. They claimed David suffered from depression, that he'd been struggling since Lori's mother left him, that Lori's rejection that night pushed him over the edge. But prosecutors refused to let sympathy overshadow justice. Lori Paige begged for help, the prosecutor said in a press conference, and she never got it. Forensic psychologists were brought in. They described David's mental state as narcissistic rage, a pattern seen in some domestic murders, especially when the victim is trying to assert independence. He couldn't handle losing control. He saw Lori's defiance not as freedom, but betrayal. That mindset, experts said, was what made him dangerous. He didn't just kill her, one psychologist explained. He killed the image of himself she refused to believe in anymore. Then came a twist no one expected. Detectives found a recording on Lori's phone. It was from the night she died. The audio was muffled but clear enough to hear shouting. "Lori, Dad, stop. David, you'll listen to me for once. Lori, get out. I'm calling the police. David, you won't talk to me like that." Then silence. That single recording shattered the defense's claim that it was an accident, proved intent, proved violence, and it silenced the courtroom when played before the jury. When the recording ended, David put his face in his hands. He didn't deny it anymore. He didn't fight. He just whispered, "I'm sorry." But for Lori's friends and family, sorry was too late. Outside the courthouse, Janet spoke again. "He took everything from me. He took my baby." The crowd applauded her courage, tears streaming down faces. It was no longer just a case, it was a movement. The jury deliberated for just 6 hours. They found David Paige guilty of second-degree murder. When the judge read the verdict, David barely reacted. He looked up once at the ceiling, then lowered his head. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. As he was led away, Janet stood in the back of the courtroom. She clutched a photo of Lori in her hands. Her voice was steady when she whispered, "Justice, finally." After the trial, questions still lingered. Had anyone seen the warning signs? Could this have been prevented? Lori's friends said yes. They'd seen her fear. They'd heard her talk about her father's anger. But she always forgave him, because he was her dad. And that's what made this tragedy unbearable. She trusted him until the very end. Lori's story became more than just a headline. It became a wake-up call about family violence, something people often ignore until it's too late. Her former college started a scholarship in her name for women escaping abusive family relationships. It was over, At least that's what everyone thought. The trial was done. The sentence had been read. David Paige would spend the rest of his life behind bars. But in Tallahassee, Florida, nothing felt finished. Not for the detectives. Not for Lori's mother. Not for the people who'd followed every heartbreaking detail of the case. Because when a father kills his daughter, the wounds don't close. They echo. The anniversary of Lori's death arrived with heavy clouds hanging over the city. The same kind of weather that had rolled in the day her body was found. At the park near her apartment, candles flickered beneath a framed photo of Lori smiling. Friends gathered quietly. They shared stories, laughter, tears. A small sign leaned against a tree. 1 year gone, forever missed. A gentle breeze rustled through the trees. It was the kind of silence that carried weight. A silence full of what-ifs. Detective Grant stood in the back, hands in his pockets. He'd promised himself he wouldn't come, but something drew him there anyway. He'd been in law enforcement for 2 decades. He'd seen monsters, maniacs, and murderers. But this case, this one still haunted him. Because Lori wasn't just another victim. She was a reminder of how love can turn lethal. Meanwhile, inside Florida State Prison, David Paige sat in a gray jumpsuit, staring at the concrete wall of his cell. He didn't talk much, didn't eat much either. The guard said he spent most of his time writing letters to Lori. Letters that would never be sent. One of them read, "I see your face every night, sweetheart. I hear your voice in my dreams. If I could take it back, I would, but I can't. I never meant for that night to end the way it did." He folded the letter neatly and placed it under his mattress, beside dozens of others. The prison chaplain visited him once a week, tried to talk about forgiveness, redemption, but David always asked the same question. "Do you think she can forgive me?" The chaplain never had an answer. He'd just say softly, "That's between you and God." But David didn't believe in God anymore. Not after what he'd done. Months after the trial, a true crime documentary crew arrived in Tallahassee. They wanted to cover the case for a national network. They called it Fathers Who Kill, the Lori Paige story. They interviewed friends, detectives, and experts. But when they reached out to Janet, Lori's mother, she refused. "I've said everything I need to say," she told them. "This isn't about him. It's about her." Still, the documentary aired nationwide. It reignited the horror. It showed body cam footage, interrogation clips, and that haunting 911 call from the neighbor. Millions watched, and once again, Lori's name trended. Not because of justice, but because of tragedy. Online forums lit up. People debated whether David was a cold-blooded killer or a broken man who lost control. Some sympathized. Most were furious. No excuse for killing your own child. He didn't snap, he decided. Rest in peace, Lori. You deserved better. TikTok creators made videos about the case. YouTube channels broke down the timeline minute by minute. Podcasts revisited the 911 recordings, analyzing every second. Lori's story spread beyond Tallahassee. It became a national conversation about domestic violence inside families, the kind no one ever wants to talk about. Janet Paige could have disappeared after the trial. She had every reason to, but she didn't. Instead, she started speaking publicly. At schools, churches, at women's shelters. Her message was clear. Abuse doesn't always look like black eyes and bruises. Sometimes it looks like control. It sounds like guilt. It feels like walking on eggshells in your own home. People listened. She turned her pain into purpose. She founded the Lori Foundation, offering resources for young adults dealing with parental violence. The foundation's motto was simple but powerful: love shouldn't hurt. Janet said the idea came from one of Lori's old journal entries. In it, Lori had written, "I just want love to feel safe again." Those words became the heart of the movement. Back in prison, David Paige finally agreed to a second interview, this time with the same detectives who'd arrested him. They wanted closure for the record, but what he told them shocked everyone. "It wasn't the first time I hurt her," he admitted quietly. "When she was little, I yelled too much. I scared her. I thought I was teaching her to respect me. But I was just making her afraid. Detective Grant stared at him. Why are you telling me this now? David sighed. Because I see it now. Every time I close my eyes, I see her crying. I wish I could tell her I understand now. He paused. But it's too late. Grant left that day with a weight he couldn't shake. A father's guilt, a daughter's fear, and a lifetime of damage that no sentence could erase. Lori's death changed more than just one family. It changed how the community handled domestic conflict reports. Before her murder, the police received several calls from her apartment complex. Disturbances, shouting, loud arguments, but no arrests. Now, after the case, the city implemented the Lori Law, requiring wellness checks and follow-up interviews for any repeat domestic disturbance calls involving family members. It wasn't just a law. It was a lifeline. In the first 6 months alone, it saved at least 4 lives. People trapped in violent family situations finally got help, before it was too late. 2 years after Lori's death, a letter arrived at Janet's home. It was from the Florida Department of Corrections. Inside was an envelope addressed in David's handwriting. She almost threw it away, but something made her open it. It read, "Janet, I don't expect forgiveness. I know what I took from you, from the world, from her. I see her in my dreams. I hear her laugh in the hallways of my mind. I am not asking you to forget. I just hope that, one day, the anger turns into something softer. Tell her I'm sorry. David." Janet didn't reply, but she placed the letter on Lori's grave the next morning. She didn't know why. Maybe to finally let go. Lori's old apartment remained empty for months. Neighbors said no one wanted to move in. They claimed strange things happened inside. Lights flickering. Doors closing on their own. The sound of soft crying late at night. Of course, no one really believed in ghosts. But for many in Tallahassee, Lori's spirit still lingered. She had become a symbol, a warning, and a voice for the silenced. For more chilling true crime stories, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel.